Vampire King's deaf baby cried nonstop on the plane, until a female passenger did the unthinkable. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a long, tense flight. The hum of the plane's engines mixed with the faint smell of recycled air and the low murmur of passengers quietly talking among themselves. But above all that, there was a sound that dominated the cabin. A sound that pierced through the low chatter and rattling of the plane. A baby crying, nonstop, unrelenting. It wasn't the usual cry of a fussy infant. This was different. The baby, no older than 1 year, seemed to be in a constant state of distress, her tiny face scrunched in pain as her cries echoed through the cabin. Passengers glanced nervously at one another, some fidgeting in their seats, others trying to ignore the rising tension. It was clear this wasn't just any ordinary baby. The child was different. She was no ordinary human baby. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, with a faint glow that hinted at something otherworldly. The Vampire King's daughter, sitting quietly beside her, kept glancing at the child, her face filled with worry. Beside her, a man in a dark suit, whose sharp features and cold demeanor made it clear he was not someone to be trifled with, looked helpless. This was the Vampire King, but even his powers seemed useless here. Despite his status, his usual command over situations was absent. The baby's deafness made it impossible for her to communicate her needs. Unable to hear her own cries, she continued to sob uncontrollably, her tiny fists clenched in frustration. The passengers around her grew increasingly uncomfortable. One man shifted in his seat, shooting a nervous glance at the Vampire King, as if expecting him to do something, anything. But the king remained silent, his gaze fixed on the baby, his mind seemingly lost in thought. His wife, the Vampire Queen, reached out to soothe the child, but even her touch didn't seem to calm her. As the flight continued, the tension grew thicker. The baby's cries didn't stop, echoing in everyone's ears. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman seated a few rows away, who had been observing the scene, stood up. She was a stranger, an ordinary passenger, but she seemed determined. With a calm that contrasted with the chaos around her, she made her way toward the child. At first, no one took much notice. She was just another passenger trying to get to her destination. But as she reached the baby, something miraculous occurred. She knelt down and gently took the baby's tiny hand in hers. The moment their skin touched, there was a subtle shift in the air, a stillness that seemed to pass through the entire cabin. The baby's cries softened, then stopped entirely. The air around the child seemed to change, as if the tension that had built up over the last hour had been lifted in an instant. The woman, a complete stranger to the royal family, had done what no one else could. She had managed to calm the Vampire King's daughter. But how? What was it about this woman that had allowed her to perform such a miraculous act? What did she know that the others didn't? The Vampire King watched in awe, his cold exterior momentarily faltering as he regarded the woman with new interest. His gaze lingered on her, a hint of something in his eyes, something that had not been present before. As the baby's soft breath returned to normal, the rest of the cabin seemed to relax, though they couldn't shake the strange feeling that something extraordinary had just happened. The woman stood up, looking around as if nothing had happened, and returned to her seat, leaving the passengers and the Vampire King to wonder, what was she, and why had she been able to do the unthinkable? The plane had settled into a strange calm after the woman had stepped forward. The cries of the baby had ceased, and the once tense atmosphere had started to return to normal. The Vampire King, his usual stoic composure shaken for the first time in years, sat quietly, watching the woman who had done the unthinkable. He had witnessed many things in his centuries of life, but nothing like this. The simple touch of a stranger had done what his own powers couldn't, soothe his daughter's pain. For a moment, the Vampire King was lost in thought, wondering if this was just a coincidence or something far deeper. He couldn't shake the feeling that this woman was no ordinary passenger. Her presence was almost familiar. The hum of the plane's engines continued, but the noise felt distant now, almost muted. The baby, once so distressed, now slept peacefully in her mother's arms. The vampire queen, whose graceful and poised demeanor had been visibly strained moments before, now allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the woman who had calmed their child. The passengers around them, who had once cast judgmental glances, were now in a state of quiet wonder. They exchanged whispers, some relieved, others curious about the woman who had seemingly worked a miracle. But for the Vampire King, the event was more than just a passing curiosity. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What was her connection to his daughter? The woman had appeared so ordinary, so unremarkable compared to the rest of the passengers on this exclusive flight. Yet, there was something in her eyes, a depth, a quiet power, that intrigued him. He had seen many powerful beings in his life, but the aura surrounding her was unique. It was almost as if she were a force of nature herself. As the plane continued on its journey, the Vampire King found his gaze lingering on her, unable to look away. The woman, seemingly unaware of the attention she had drawn, sat back down in her seat, her face calm and composed as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The Vampire King's instincts urged him to approach her, to demand answers. But he held back. There was something about the moment that made him hesitate. It wasn't just the mystery of her abilities, it was something deeper. It was as if the very air around her carried a weight of importance. He wasn't the only one who had noticed her. The Vampire Queen had been watching her closely as well. Their silent exchange spoke volumes. The Queen had not missed the connection, and she, too, was filled with questions. But the time for words was not yet. There was more to this woman, and the Vampire King would find out what. He knew that she was no stranger to the supernatural. It was clear in the way she had handled the situation, her calm and composed demeanor in the face of a crisis. As the flight continued, the Vampire King's mind wandered back to the moment when the woman had touched his daughter's hand. He could feel the strange, almost electric energy that had flowed between them. It was as if some hidden force had been awakened. It made no sense. He had never encountered anything like it before. The baby, who had been so helpless just moments ago, was now sleeping soundly in her mother's arms. The atmosphere in the cabin had settled into a peaceful stillness, but the Vampire King could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. The woman had done something that no one else could. He had seen his own kind fail to soothe his daughter before, but she had succeeded with nothing more than a simple touch. It was then that he made a decision. The moment they landed, he would find this woman. He had to know who she was, and why she had such an uncanny ability. And there was one more thing. He felt a strange pull toward her, something beyond curiosity. A connection, perhaps, that he could not yet explain. The rest of the flight passed in relative silence. The Vampire King sat deep in thought, his cold eyes occasionally flicking toward the woman. His mind was racing, but his expression remained unchanged. The baby slept peacefully, oblivious to the intense gaze of the Vampire King. He would not forget this encounter. Something had changed today, something that would shape the course of his future, and possibly hers as well. As the plane began its descent, the Vampire King's resolve hardened. When the plane landed, he would find her, the woman who had done the unthinkable. The plane touched down smoothly at the airport, the roar of the engines fading as the wheels met the runway. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The brief moment of serenity that had settled after the baby's cries had stopped now felt fragile, as if the calm could shatter at any moment. The Vampire King stood slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the cabin once more. His gaze locked onto the woman who had calmed his daughter, and he took a step forward. His expression remained unreadable, but his presence was commanding, drawing the attention of anyone nearby. The Queen, sitting beside him, placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her eyes spoke volumes, a mixture of concern and curiosity. But she said nothing, understanding his need to follow through with what had been set into motion. The woman who had intervened with such ease had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea how deeply her actions had affected the Vampire King, and how much weight they carried. She had simply acted out of kindness. Her name was Clara Thompson, a woman who had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As she stepped off the plane, the weight of the moment pressed down on her. The crowd was bustling around her, but she felt strangely alone, as though a quiet storm had passed through her. She had no explanation for what had happened on the plane, only that something had shifted. She couldn't help but feel that the child she had helped wasn't just any baby, and the parents were certainly not ordinary people. But why had they seemed so different? As she made her way through the terminal, Clara felt a presence behind her. She turned, only to find the Vampire King walking toward her, his cold, calculating gaze fixed on her. There was no mistaking the power he exuded. He was a man who commanded respect, even fear. She could feel it in the air, the way people stepped aside as he approached. He was not someone you ignored. "Clara Thompson," he said, his voice low, almost too smooth, as if every word was weighed with purpose. Clara froze. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she wondered if she was imagining things. How did he know her name? She had not even spoken to him, nor had anyone else introduced her. But before she could speak, he continued, "I need to speak with you. There are matters that require your attention." Clara's mind raced. What could this man want with her? She had done nothing special, nothing more than help a crying child. But there was something about him, something in the way he said those words, that made her feel as though her life had just been turned upside down. "I don't think Clara began, but the Vampire King cut her off with a single gesture, a flick of his hand that silenced her. "You will come with me." His tone was firm, unwavering. It was clear that arguing would be futile. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. With a reluctant nod, Clara followed him. The Vampire King led her to a private area in the airport, away from prying eyes. His bodyguards remained a few steps behind, ensuring that no one would overhear the conversation. Clara stood there, unsure of what was happening or what was about to unfold. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice softening ever so slightly. "You think you helped a child, but what you did was much more than that." Clara swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. I just helped," she said quietly, her voice betraying her confusion. "You think it was a coincidence that you were able to calm my daughter?" the Vampire King asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Clara shook her head, still not understanding. "No, I don't know. I just did what felt right." She was in pain. The Vampire King's gaze softened for a brief moment, but the weight of his words was still heavy in the air. "You are no ordinary woman, Clara. What you did wasn't just instinct. You have a connection to her. To us." Clara blinked, her mind racing. "A connection? What do you mean?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have been alive for centuries, and I have seen many things. But I have never encountered someone like you. Your touch, your words, they reached my daughter in a way that nothing else could. You have a power within you, one that even you may not fully understand." Clara took a step back, her heart pounding. I don't have any power. I'm just a woman, a simple cleaning lady. Don't be so quick to dismiss what you are capable of," the Vampire King interrupted. "You've done something extraordinary, something no one else could do. That is not a coincidence." Clara's mind was spinning. What had she gotten herself into? How was it possible that she, an ordinary woman, could have done something that even the most powerful beings could not? The Vampire King looked at her with a mixture of intrigue and something deeper, something that made Clara feel exposed, as if he could see straight through her. "You will come with me. There is much more for you to learn," he said, his voice unwavering. Clara had no choice but to follow him. She was already caught in his web, and somehow, she knew that her life would never be the same again. As they walked away from the airport, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world she wasn't prepared for, a world where everything she had known was about to change. Clara followed the Vampire King, the weight of his gaze never leaving her. The intensity of his presence was overwhelming, and yet there was something calming about it, something that made her feel oddly safe, though she knew she should feel the opposite. The world around her felt distant, the normal hum of the airport fading into the background as she walked beside him, lost in her thoughts. Where was he taking her? What did he mean by connection? Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened since they had landed. The strange calm she had brought to the baby, the strange energy that seemed to connect her to the Vampire King's family. It didn't make sense. She was just an ordinary woman. At least, that's what she thought. "You have questions," the Vampire King said, breaking the silence between them. Clara nodded, her throat tight. "I have a lot of questions," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it was hard to tell if it was genuine. "I'll answer what I can," he said. They walked through the airport, past the usual crowds, and Clara found herself being led to a private area. The walls were lined with smooth, polished stone, and there was a certain coldness in the air, as if the entire space was designed for people who preferred solitude. As they entered the room, Clara noticed a large wooden table in the center, a few chairs around it. The Vampire King motioned for her to sit, and she hesitated only for a moment before taking a seat. He sat opposite her, his expression unreadable as he studied her. Clara's heart was still racing, her mind swirling with confusion. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The Vampire King leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the edge of the table in a rhythmic motion. "You've done something extraordinary, Clara," he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying intensity. "Something that should have been impossible." Clara frowned, her brow furrowing. "I just helped a baby," she said, still not understanding. "It wasn't just helping a baby," the Vampire King replied. "It was the way you helped her, the way you connected with her. My daughter, as you may not have realized, is not just any child. She is part of something far greater, something beyond human understanding. And yet, you were able to reach her in a way no one else could. That is no coincidence." Clara's confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm just a woman. I don't know anything about your world or your daughter. I just saw a baby in pain, and I try to help. That's all." The Vampire King's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the intensity in his gaze never wavered. "What you did, Clara, goes beyond mere kindness. You possess something, a rare ability, something that connects you to my family, to my daughter. There is power in your blood, something ancient and untapped." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're saying I have some kind of power?" she asked, disbelieving. "Yes," the Vampire King said, his voice steady. "But it is not something you can control. Not yet. It is a connection to a force that has been dormant for centuries, one that is now awakening. Your touch, your presence, triggered something within my daughter. And that is why you are here now." Clara shook her head, trying to wrap her mind around what he was saying. "This is insane," she murmured. "I don't understand. I'm just me." The Vampire King's expression darkened slightly. "You are not just you, Clara, and that is something you need to understand. You have been chosen, whether you realize it or not. There is a reason why you were in that plane, why you were there to help my daughter. The fate of many things rests on your shoulders now, whether you are ready for it or not." Clara's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. "I didn't choose this," she whispered. "I didn't ask for any of this." The Vampire King stood suddenly, his tall frame towering over her. "None of us ever choose our path, Clara, but sometimes our paths are chosen for us. And when that happens, we must walk them, no matter how difficult or uncertain they may be." Clara stood, her legs shaking beneath her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I want you to embrace what you are," the Vampire King said. "I want you to understand that you are part of something greater now. And I want you to help us. Help me protect my daughter. Help me understand what is happening and why you were brought into our lives." Clara took a step back, her mind racing. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even understand what's going on." The Vampire King's gaze softened slightly, but the determination in his eyes remained. "You don't have to understand everything right away, but you must trust that you are not alone in this. I will help guide you, as will my family, but only if you choose to accept your role." Clara stared at him for a long moment, her mind struggling to process everything that had been said. She had never asked for this, never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't walk away from this now. There was too much at stake. And so, with a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it. I'll help." The Vampire King's lips curled into a small smile, though it was tinged with something more serious, something deeper. "Good," he said. "Then we begin." Clara's mind raced as she followed the Vampire King down the long, dimly lit hallway. Her heart still pounded in her chest, the weight of the conversation they had just shared pressing heavily on her. She had agreed to help him, to step into a world she could not even begin to understand. The Vampire King's words echoed in her mind. You are part of something greater now. What did that even mean? She had never wanted any part of a life filled with secrets and power struggles, but somehow, here she was. She glanced at the Vampire King, walking ahead of her with an air of quiet confidence that commanded respect. His dark suit blended seamlessly with the shadows of the corridor, his every step exuding an almost otherworldly grace. His tall frame seemed to fill the space, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just a man. He was something more. He was a vampire, an ancient being who had seen centuries pass, and yet here he was, seeking her help. Clara had been thrown into a world she didn't understand, and yet, somehow, she felt connected to it. Something in her had responded when she touched his daughter, and now she couldn't ignore the pull of that connection. They reached the end of the hallway, where a large door stood before them. The Vampire King turned to her, his gaze steady. This is where we begin, he said quietly. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Was this where her new life would start? The door creaked open as the Vampire King pushed it, revealing a lavishly furnished room inside. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and the air smelled faintly of incense. At the center of the room stood a large wooden table, cluttered with various ancient-looking books and artifacts. The Vampire King motioned for Clara to sit. Sit, he commanded softly, his voice still carrying an undeniable authority. Clara obeyed, sitting at the edge of the chair as the Vampire King took the seat across from her. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Clara felt an almost tangible connection between them. You are now part of something much larger than yourself, Clara, the Vampire King said, his voice low and steady. What happened on the plane, what you did for my daughter, was only the beginning. There is much you need to learn, and I will teach you. Clara swallowed, trying to find her voice. I don't know what's happening, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand how I'm connected to all of this. The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. The power within you is not something you can ignore. It is tied to ancient forces, forces that have been dormant for centuries. You may not fully understand it yet, but it is awakening now. It has to. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Awakening. It felt as though she had stumbled into a story far bigger than herself, a story that had been unfolding long before she had even arrived. She glanced down at her hands, still unsure of what kind of power the Vampire King was talking about. She was just an ordinary woman, or so she thought. I don't know how to use any power, Clara said, shaking her head. I just did what felt right. I helped because I wanted to. I didn't think it meant anything more than that. The Vampire King's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity never left his gaze. That is the first step, Clara. You have the ability to tap into something that even you may not fully comprehend. It is not just about power. It's about understanding your connection to those who came before you, to those who shaped this world. Clara looked up at him, her confusion deepening. Who are these people? What does this have to do with me? The Vampire King took a deep breath before answering. There is a bloodline, Clara. A bloodline that has existed for millennia. A bloodline connected to my family. Your ancestors were part of that bloodline. You may not know it, but your lineage has ties to the supernatural world. That is why you are here now. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She felt as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. My ancestors, she whispered. But I'm just a cleaning woman. I don't have anything to do with this. The Vampire King shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. You are more than you know, Clara. The blood you carry is ancient, and it is awakening, just as the power within you is awakening. You are not just a cleaning woman. You are a key player in something far greater than you realize. Clara's mind was spinning. She had never been part of anything important, never been part of something that could change the course of history. And now, suddenly, she was being told that her bloodline was connected to a supernatural world she had never believed in. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice trembling. The Vampire King's gaze softened, though his expression was still serious. I want you to learn. I want you to understand the power within you, and I want you to help us protect my daughter. There are forces out there, forces that will stop at nothing to control what you have. What we have. Clara's mind raced as she processed his words. Forces that would stop at nothing to control her. She didn't know what she was stepping into, but she knew she couldn't back away now. Somehow, She had become a part of this world, and there was no turning back. With a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now, though fear still lingered in the pit of her stomach. "I'll help." The Vampire King's eyes narrowed slightly, as if appraising her. Then he nodded. "Good. Then we begin now." The days that followed were a blur for Clara. She had barely returned to her small, modest apartment when the Vampire King's people arrived to escort her to his estate. There was no escaping it now. She was part of something she didn't fully understand, but the weight of it was unmistakable. The car ride felt long and silent, the heavy air inside the luxurious black sedan thick with tension. Clara sat in the back, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Every question she had asked seemed to hang unanswered, and she wondered if this was all some kind of dream. But the smooth, almost mechanical drive only confirmed that this was real. This was happening. The Vampire King, who had been silent for most of the ride, finally spoke, his deep voice breaking the quiet. "You will be trained. Your connection to my family and to the power within you must be understood. The forces that are after you will not wait, and they will stop at nothing." Clara turned her head, meeting his gaze. She still didn't know what these forces were, or why she had been chosen. But the way the Vampire King spoke, like the world had its eyes on her, waiting, was unnerving. "I don't even know where to begin," Clara said, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know what this power is, or how I can help. I'm just—" Her voice trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. "Just a woman?" The Vampire King finished for her, his tone a mixture of amusement and something else. "No, Clara. You are much more than that. Your bloodline has been dormant for centuries. But now it's waking up. And with it, so will the dangers. Do you understand?" Clara shook her head, her confusion still deepening. "I don't understand any of this. I don't even know what you mean by bloodline." The Vampire King sighed, turning his gaze out the window. "You were born with a gift, Clara. A gift passed down through your family, though it has been hidden from you. It's a rare, ancient ability. You have the power to connect with and influence the supernatural, whether you realize it or not. It's what you did on the plane. It's what you did for my daughter." Clara blinked, trying to wrap her mind around his words. The supernatural. She had never believed in anything beyond the ordinary. But the events of the past few days had shown her that there was more to the world than she had ever imagined. "But I didn't do anything special," she replied. "I just helped." "It wasn't. It was special," he interrupted, his eyes meeting hers once more. "It was exactly what needed to be done. And now, you will learn how to control it. We cannot afford for you to remain ignorant of the power you possess. Not when there are others who would seek to use it for their own gain." The car slowed as they approached a massive iron gate, which creaked open to reveal a sprawling mansion nestled within a large, private estate. Clara's heart skipped a beat. The estate looked like something out of a fairy tale, elegant, imposing, and somehow alive with an ancient energy. It was everything she had never imagined. The car drove through the gates and up a long, winding driveway, past gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly. They finally came to a stop in front of a grand stone mansion, its windows darkened as though it had been waiting for them. Clara stepped out of the car and felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This was where her life was about to change. As they walked into the mansion, the Vampire King's guards moved silently behind them, ensuring that no one would disturb their arrival. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior, grand chandeliers, dark wooden furniture, and tapestries that seemed to tell stories from centuries past. "This will be your home for the time being," the Vampire King said as they entered a large, circular room with high ceilings. "It is here that you will train, learn what you need to know, and prepare for what's coming." Clara glanced around, her mind racing. She had no idea what to expect, or how she was supposed to learn about this power. It all seemed impossible. "What kind of training?" she asked hesitantly, still unsure of what she had agreed to. "You will learn to control your abilities," the Vampire King explained. "You will learn to understand the forces within you and how they connect to the world around you. This place is where that training will take place. You will be guided, but you must also be willing to learn, Clara. If you want to help us, you must understand your role." Clara swallowed hard. She had no choice now. This was the path she had chosen, whether she was ready or not. She nodded slowly, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "I'll do what I can," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. The Vampire King's gaze softened, though there was still a sharpness to it. That is all I ask. You are no longer just a woman. You are part of something much greater. Embrace it, and you will find the strength you need to help us. Clara took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. She had already stepped into a world that was beyond her understanding, but it was too late to walk away. The only thing she could do now was move forward, and hope that, somehow, she would find the strength to meet the challenges ahead. Clara's first day of training felt like stepping into a new life, one that was more foreign than anything she could have imagined. The Vampire King had explained the basics of her role, but now the true weight of her situation was settling in. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of something much bigger, something that had been hidden from her until now. The mansion, vast and seemingly endless, had become her new world. The stone walls were lined with old books, artifacts from different times, some of which Clara couldn't even begin to understand. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, mixing with the ancient wood and stone. It felt as though she had entered a world that existed outside of time. The Vampire King had given her a private room, but she was never truly alone. His people were everywhere, guards, servants, and mysterious figures who seemed to watch her from a distance. They were all part of the world she had unknowingly entered, and Clara wasn't sure how to navigate it. She had agreed to learn, but now that the training had begun, she realized that there was so much more to it than she could have anticipated. The first lesson had been simple, or so it seemed. She was led into a large chamber, where a circle of candles surrounded a dark stone altar. The air was thick with energy, a palpable force that seemed to vibrate in the very air she breathed. Focus! The Vampire King's voice echoed from behind her, his words calm but heavy with intent. Clara stood in the center of the circle, her feet cold against the stone floor, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what to expect. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel the power within you," the Vampire King instructed. "It's already there, waiting to be awakened. You must learn to access it." Clara stared at the altar, the flickering flames casting strange shadows on the walls. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to understand what he meant. She had felt something before, on the plane, with the baby, but this was different. This was a much deeper power, something that resonated within her, almost as if it were part of her bloodline. The warmth of the flames seemed to grow, the air around her shifting as though it were alive. She reached out a hand, instinctively, and felt a surge of energy course through her, a rush of power she had never experienced before. The candles flickered violently, as if reacting to her. For a brief moment, Clara felt a sense of control, like she could bend the energy to her will. But just as quickly as it came, the feeling vanished. She gasped, her hand trembling as she pulled it back. "That's it," the Vampire King said, his voice low but encouraging. "You tapped into it. Now, learn to control it." Clara opened her eyes, looking at him in shock. "That was real? That power, it came from me?" "Yes," the Vampire King replied. "And it's just the beginning. You have a gift, Clara, but gifts like this are not without consequence. It's dangerous to unleash power you cannot control, and that is why you are here. To learn control, to understand the power that runs through your veins." Clara swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. She had no idea how to control it. All she knew was that she had felt something powerful, and it frightened her. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he observed her. "You will need time, of course," he said. "This power is ancient. It's tied to your bloodline. But it is also volatile. If you lose control, it could harm you, and everyone around you." Clara shivered at the thought. She couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. But there was no turning back now. She had already agreed to help, and if there was any chance that she could learn to control this power, to help the Vampire King and his family, she would have to do it. She nodded slowly, determined. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll learn. I'll do what it takes." The Vampire King studied her for a moment, as if assessing her resolve. Then he nodded. "Good. But remember, Clara, control is not the only thing you will need. You must also understand the world you are now part of. There are others who would seek to use your abilities for their own gain. They will not hesitate to come after you." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had already faced the unknown, But now she realized that this world, this hidden supernatural realm, was full of dangers she hadn't even imagined. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The Vampire King's eyes darkened. "The Dark Clan," he said, his tone cold. "They are our enemies. They have been hunting my family for centuries. They know of your bloodline, Clara, and they will stop at nothing to control you, to use you as a weapon." Clara's mind raced. She had no idea there was such a threat looming over her, that there were people, or clans, who would try to use her in such a way. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "Train, learn, and protect yourself," the Vampire King said. "You will need to become strong, Clara, strong enough to fight back when the time comes." As the training continued, Clara's mind was filled with questions, doubts, and fears. But she knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. She was part of this world, for better or worse. And if she was going to survive it, she would have to learn quickly. The next few days were filled with intense training, mental exercises, physical challenges, and lessons on the supernatural forces that she was now a part of. But Clara was determined to learn, to control the power that was awakening within her. She could feel it, deep inside her, pulsing with energy. And with each passing day, she knew that the stakes were getting higher. She wasn't just learning to control her power. She was learning to survive in a world where everything she had known was turned upside down. Clara's days had begun to blur into one another. The mansion, once a foreign place filled with unknowns, had become the backdrop for her new life. Each room, each corner, seemed to pulse with an energy that was both unsettling and familiar. She was learning, slowly, how to tap into the power within her. But the weight of it all was starting to take its toll. Training with the Vampire King had been intense. Her mind was filled with ancient lore, rituals, and techniques that she never thought she would encounter. Every moment spent learning felt like a moment lost in a world she didn't belong to. The Vampire King, ever patient but firm, had pushed her harder than anyone else could. He had a way of making her face the power within her, of forcing her to confront the truth she had been running from. She was different. Clara stood in front of a large, ornate mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes darker than before. She had changed, and not just in appearance. The power inside her was growing stronger. She could feel it now, thrumming beneath her skin. It was a constant hum, a reminder that she was no longer the same woman who had stepped onto that plane weeks ago. The knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned quickly, unsure of who it could be. "Come in," she called, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. The door creaked open, and the Vampire King stepped into the room. His presence was commanding, yet there was something softer in his demeanor today. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of something deeper. "It's time for you to face what's coming. We can no longer prepare for the unknown. We must act." Clara's heart raced. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything she had been training for would come to a head. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's time for you to use the power you've been learning to control," the Vampire King said, his gaze intense. "The Dark Clan has found us. They are moving closer. The time for hiding is over." Clara felt a chill wash over her. The Dark Clan. She had heard their names spoken in whispers, but she had never truly understood the threat they posed. Now, it seemed they were closing in. "What do we do?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. "We fight," he replied simply. "But we can't do it alone. You must be ready, Clara. This is why you're here. To protect us, to fight alongside us." Clara's mind raced as she absorbed his words. She had never wanted this, never asked for this fight. But she knew now that there was no turning back. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice faltered slightly. "I will fight." The Vampire King nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Good. But know this, Clara. Once we start this fight, there will be no turning back. The Dark Clan will not stop until they have what they want. They will stop at nothing to take control of your abilities." Clara swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. She had already come this far, and she couldn't stop now. She had a responsibility to herself, to the people she had come to care about, and to the power within her. "I understand," she said, her voice steady now. "What do I need to do?" The Vampire King stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "We will begin with a demonstration. I will push you, Clara. You must be prepared to confront your power head-on. This is not just about controlling it. It's about understanding it, accepting it. You must trust yourself, trust that you have the strength to fight. Clara nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. She didn't know what the demonstration would entail, but she knew it was the next step in her journey. The Vampire King motioned for her to follow him. They moved through the mansion's winding halls, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Clara's mind raced, her thoughts swirling with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. They reached a large, open space deep within the mansion, a training room, Clara realized. The walls were lined with ancient weapons, some of which she recognized from her lessons, others she had never seen before. At the center of the room stood a large, circular stone platform, surrounded by a faint, glowing energy. The Vampire King turned to face her. "This is where you will face your power," he said, his tone serious. "Step onto the platform, Clara. Focus, and let the energy flow through you." Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing with nerves. She stepped onto the platform, feeling the cold stone beneath her feet. As soon as she did, a surge of energy pulsed through her, and the room seemed to shift. The air thickened, the temperature rising, and Clara felt the power within her stir, as though it were waking from a long slumber. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to control the surge of energy. The Vampire King's voice echoed in her mind. "You must trust yourself, Clara. Let it flow." Clara's hands trembled as she raised them in front of her, and for the first time, she felt the power inside her respond. It was like nothing she had ever felt before, intense, raw, and almost overwhelming. She could feel the energy coursing through her, radiating from her fingertips, and for a brief moment, she was lost in it. But then, as the Vampire King's words came back to her, Clara focused, centering herself. She exhaled slowly, focusing on the energy, letting it flow through her without letting it control her. Slowly, the glow around her dimmed, and the air settled back to normal. Clara opened her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it. She had controlled the power. The Vampire King stood before her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Clara felt unsure, but then he nodded. "Well done, Clara," he said, his voice filled with quiet approval. "You've taken the first step. Now, we prepare for what comes next." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The fight was coming, and she was ready. Clara stood at the edge of the stone platform, her breath still coming in short gasps after the intense training session. Her hands trembled slightly, the energy still thrumming beneath her skin, but now it felt different, controlled, tempered by focus. She had learned to manage the raw power that had once terrified her, and though she was exhausted, there was a flicker of something deeper inside her, something that felt more like acceptance than fear. The Vampire King observed her quietly, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. He didn't speak right away, but Clara could tell he was assessing her, as he always did after every exercise. "You did well," he said at last, his voice low and measured. Clara gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak just yet. "But you are far from ready," he continued, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "What you just learned is only the beginning. The real challenge comes when you face the Dark Clan." Clara's stomach tightened at the mention of them. She had heard their names spoken in hushed tones since she first arrived at the estate. The Dark Clan were the enemies the Vampire King spoke of, a force so powerful and dangerous that even the Vampire King's centuries of strength couldn't guarantee victory against them. "What should I expect?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it about them that makes them so dangerous?" The Vampire King stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as though he were trying to peer into her very soul. "The Dark Clan is relentless. They are ancient, and their thirst for power knows no bounds. They will stop at nothing to control what you have, Clara, and that includes you. Your bloodline, your abilities, everything about you is a threat to them." Clara shivered at his words. She had never considered herself a threat to anyone, let alone a group of ancient, powerful beings. "So what do I do?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "How do I stop them?" The Vampire King gave her a small, cold smile. "You don't stop them. You survive them." His words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. "Survive?" she repeated. "I'm not going to just run away. I want to fight. I have to fight." The Vampire King's expression hardened, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of something like respect in his gaze. "Good," he said, his voice unwavering. "That's exactly what I want to hear. But fighting requires more than just raw power. It requires strategy, control, and a deep understanding of the forces you're up against. The Dark Clan isn't just about strength. They're about manipulation, deception, and fear." Clara felt a chill spread through her. The idea of fighting such an enemy was terrifying, but she knew the Vampire King was right. She couldn't back down now. Not after everything that had happened. "How do we fight them then?" she asked, her voice steadying. "What do we do next?" The Vampire King turned, his eyes scanning the room as if he were contemplating something. "We prepare," he said simply. "We gather our forces, our allies, and we study them. The Dark Clan's movements are subtle, but they are not invisible. We will find them before they find us. And when the time comes, you will be ready." Clara nodded, though she still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on her shoulders. She had never wanted this responsibility, but now, it felt like the only path forward. "What do you need from me?" she asked, ready to take the next step. "Everything you have," the Vampire King replied, his voice grave. "Your strength, your focus, your commitment. You are no longer just an observer, Clara. You are a participant in this war. And when the Dark Clan strikes, you must be ready to protect everything you care about." Clara met his gaze, feeling a spark of determination deep within her. The path ahead was dark, filled with danger and uncertainty, but she couldn't turn back. She had made her choice. And now, it was time to see it through. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice firm, despite the fear that still lingered in the pit of her stomach. The Vampire King gave a slight nod, his gaze softening just slightly. "I believe you will be," he said. "Now, we begin the real training. The kind that will test every part of you, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Are you ready to face it?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she straightened her back, meeting his unwavering gaze. "Yes," she said, the word ringing out with more confidence than she felt. "I'm ready." The Vampire King studied her for a long moment, as though evaluating her decision. Finally, he spoke again, his voice full of approval. "Good. Then let the training begin." The next few days were a blur of relentless training and preparation. Clara had barely any time to herself. Each moment was spent learning, fighting, or meditating, trying to hone the power inside her. Every lesson from the Vampire King was a challenge, but she could feel herself growing stronger. At first, the energy had felt wild and uncontrollable, like a storm crashing within her. But now, it felt like a constant companion, always there, always waiting for her to use it. She could feel the subtle hum of power beneath her skin, even when she wasn't actively focusing on it. It was like an extension of herself. Despite the progress, Clara knew the true test was still ahead. The Dark Clan was coming, and there was no telling when they would strike. But Clara was no longer the same woman who had first stepped into the mansion. She had learned to control the energy, to focus her mind, and to prepare her body for what was to come. Her physical training had been grueling. She had never considered herself strong. She was just an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. But the Vampire King had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscles. It was about mental resilience, adaptability, and knowing when to push past your limits. Every day, she ran drills, sparred with instructors, and practiced meditative techniques that sharpened her focus. She had become faster, more agile, and her reflexes had improved. Her body, once unfamiliar with combat, had now grown accustomed to the strain. The mental training was just as difficult. Clara had to learn to remain calm under pressure, to silence the chaos of her mind when the world around her seemed to be falling apart. She had learned to harness her emotions, channeling them into her power, rather than allowing fear or anger to control her. At times, the training felt like it would break her. There were moments when she thought she might collapse from exhaustion or give in to the overwhelming weight of everything she had been asked to do. But every time she faltered, the Vampire King was there, watching her with a sharp, calculating gaze, his presence always reminding her of what was at stake. "You're almost there," he would say, his voice low and steady. "You're stronger than you think." The first time she truly felt the weight of her power was during a sparring session. She had been paired with one of the Vampire King's most skilled warriors, a woman whose speed and strength seemed impossible to match. At first, Clara was overwhelmed. She was knocked down repeatedly, unable to anticipate the warrior's movements. But then, something inside her clicked. She felt the power stir within her, a familiar warmth that spread through her limbs. Without thinking, Clara moved. She blocked the warrior's strike, then countered with an attack of her own. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost instinctive. She could feel the energy guiding her, telling her when to strike, when to block, when to retreat. For the first time, Clara felt in control of the power she had struggled with for so long. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was commanding it. The Vampire King watched from the sidelines, his eyes never leaving her as the battle unfolded. When Clara finally managed to land a blow that sent the warrior stumbling back, he stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Well done," he said, his voice steady but filled with something that sounded like approval. Clara's heart was racing, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. It felt good to finally be in control, to finally be able to defend herself. But the Vampire King's next words wiped the smile from her face. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice hardening. "You may have won this round, but the real battle is still to come. The Dark Clan is not like any enemy you've faced before. They are cunning, manipulative, and they will use everything they have to break you." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to back down now. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the mansion. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more focused. But as the Vampire King's words echoed in her mind, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something that went beyond just surviving the Dark Clan's attack. She had become a part of something far more dangerous, a world that she had never known existed. And she was beginning to wonder if the forces she was learning to fight against were not the only threat she would face. As Clara walked through the mansion later that night, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, only to find the Vampire King standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "You've come a long way, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "But there is still much to be done." Clara nodded, unsure of what he meant. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." The Vampire King studied her for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You are not just learning to fight, Clara. You are learning to survive. There is more at stake than you realize. You are part of a larger story now, and it will test everything you have." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in his words, something that spoke of a danger beyond the Dark Clan. But there was no turning back now. She had committed herself to this fight, and no matter what came next, she would face it head-on. The Vampire King's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the shadows of the mansion, her mind racing with the knowledge that her journey was far from over. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind for Clara. Her days were filled with training, each one more intense than the last. Every lesson was an attempt to prepare her for the inevitable confrontation with the Dark Clan. Despite the progress she had made, Clara could feel the weight of the responsibility growing heavier each day. The fear that had once paralyzed her had now been replaced by a burning determination. She was learning to trust herself, to embrace the power within her, but she still didn't fully understand the depths of it. The Vampire King's teachings had gone beyond the basics of control. He had shown her how to channel her power into specific purposes, creating barriers of energy, amplifying her strength, and even manipulating elements of the environment around her. The energy had become a part of her, flowing through her veins like lifeblood. But it was also a volatile force, and the king had made sure to remind her of that at every turn. Clara had to remain calm and focused. She couldn't afford to lose control. She couldn't afford to fail. One morning, after another grueling session with the Vampire King, Clara was summoned to a private meeting in one of the mansion's upper chambers. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The Vampire King was already there, standing by a large window that overlooked the expansive grounds of the estate. "Clara," he said, his tone grave, "you've learned much. But there is one final test before we face the Dark Clan. You need to understand your connection to this power, not just in theory, but in practice." Clara swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. She had trained for this moment, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this final test. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. The Vampire King turned to face her, his eyes dark and calculating. You must face your fear, he said. You've been running from it, consciously or unconsciously, but it's time to confront it. The Dark Clan thrives on fear, Clara. If you are to stand against them, you must be unshaken by it. Clara felt her stomach churn at the mention of fear. The Vampire King was right. She had been afraid of the power she didn't understand, afraid of the danger that loomed over her, afraid of what the Dark Clan would do to her, and to those she cared about. But the king was asking her to do something she wasn't sure she could. How could she face her fear when it had been paralyzing her for so long? How do I face it? She asked quietly. How do I confront something that terrifies me? The Vampire King stepped closer to her, his gaze intense. You've already done it. Every time you stand up, every time you train, every time you push yourself beyond your limits, you are facing it. But now you must do it consciously. You must bring your fear into the light, look at it, and accept it. Only then can you free yourself from it. Clara's breath hitched. The thought of facing her deepest fears was overwhelming, but the king was right. She had to overcome it. She had no choice. The Vampire King extended his hand, a strange energy swirling around his fingers. I will guide you, he said, but you must be willing to face what lies beneath the surface. Trust me. Clara looked at his hand, hesitated for only a moment, then took it. The moment their hands touched, a jolt of energy shot through her, and the room around her seemed to blur. Her vision swirled, and she found herself in a different place, a place filled with darkness. The air was thick with tension, and Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone, and yet, she could sense something, someone, watching her. It was her fear, the embodiment of everything she had been running from. It was there in the shadows, moving just beyond her sight, a looming presence that threatened to swallow her whole. Clara tried to steady her breathing, but the fear was suffocating. She could feel it tightening around her, wrapping around her like a physical force. The Vampire King's voice echoed in her mind. Face it, Clara. You are stronger than this. She forced herself to focus, her hands trembling as she raised them in front of her. The fear tried to take hold, but Clara refused to let it. She reached deep within herself, tapping into the power that had been building inside her for so long. The energy surged to her fingertips, glowing brightly. She could feel the darkness retreating, the shadows dissipating as her light grew stronger. You cannot control me, Clara shouted, her voice fierce. The shadows recoiled, but they didn't disappear. Instead, they circled around her, as if testing her, challenging her. You are not real, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. You are just fear. With every word, the fear began to lose its grip on her. The shadows writhed and shrank back, no longer holding the same power they once had. Clara stood tall, the energy within her radiating outward, dispelling the darkness. She could feel the weight lifting from her chest, the panic subsiding. The fear was still there, lurking, but it no longer controlled her. She was in control. Slowly, the darkness faded, and Clara found herself back in the mansion's chamber. She gasped for breath, her hands still shaking, but the fear was gone. The Vampire King stood before her, watching her with an unreadable expression. You did it, he said quietly. You faced it. Clara nodded, her chest still rising and falling with each breath, but her heart was no longer filled with dread. She had confronted her fear, and she had won. What now? She asked, her voice steadier than she expected. The Vampire King's lips curled into a faint smile. Now, we prepare to face the Dark Clan. You've taken the first step in becoming the warrior you were always meant to be. And when the time comes, you will not be afraid. Clara nodded, the weight of the moment settling on her. She was ready. The Vampire King's words echoed in Clara's mind as she prepared for the next stage of her training. She had faced her fears, but she knew that the true test was still ahead. The Dark Clan was coming, and there was no more time to waste. Every moment she spent in the mansion, every lesson and practice session, felt like a step closer to the final confrontation. The mansion had become her sanctuary, but it also felt like a cage at times, as though the walls were closing in around her. Clara had never felt the weight of responsibility as she did now. The power within her was growing stronger each day, but so was the fear of what it could mean. She had learned to control it, to some degree, but she knew that the real battle would not be fought with brute force alone. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and Clara had to be ready for whatever came next. It was early one morning when the Vampire King summoned her to the main hall. The air felt thick with anticipation, the quiet hum of the mansion amplified in the stillness. Clara had become accustomed to the daily grind of training, but today felt different. Today felt like the calm before the storm. When she arrived, the Vampire King was waiting for her. His expression was unreadable, as always, but there was a new intensity in his gaze. "Clara," he began, his voice low and steady. "The time has come for us to make our move. The Dark Clan is on the move, and we can't afford to wait any longer." Clara's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Dark Clan. She had trained for this moment, but now that it was finally here, she wasn't sure what to expect. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves that twisted in her stomach. "We fight," the Vampire King said. "Simply, but we do not fight blindly. You have learned to control your power, but now we need to take it further. We need to move with precision, with strategy. We need to gather allies and prepare for the inevitable battle." Clara nodded, her mind racing. "I'm ready," she said, though doubt still lingered in her chest. "But how do we prepare for something we don't fully understand?" The Vampire King's eyes softened for a moment, a rare flicker of understanding in his gaze. "The Dark Clan is not like us. They are ancient, yes, but they thrive on fear and manipulation. We must be ready to face them on every level, physically, mentally, and emotionally." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You have learned the physical side of your power, but now we will focus on the mental and emotional aspects. You must learn to anticipate their moves, to outsmart them before they can strike." Clara's chest tightened at the thought of the Dark Clan's manipulative tactics. She had faced her own fears, but facing an enemy that could play with her mind felt like an entirely different challenge. "How do we do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will learn to read them," the Vampire King replied. "Their emotions, their thoughts. They are powerful, but they are also flawed. And you, Clara, have the ability to tap into something they cannot. You will use their weaknesses against them." Clara's head spun as she processed his words. The idea of reading someone's thoughts, of anticipating their every move, seemed impossible. But then, the Vampire King had been right about so many things already. Maybe she could learn this too. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm. "I won't fail." The Vampire King nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good," he said. "Then we begin the mental training." Over the next few days, Clara found herself pushed harder than ever before. She had always believed that strength came from physical prowess, from training her body to fight. But the Vampire King showed her that true power came from understanding her enemy, not just on a physical level, but on a deeper, more personal one. He taught her how to tune into the subtle shifts in energy around her, how to read the smallest of body movements, the slightest changes in tone. It was like learning to see the invisible threads that connected everything. At first, it was overwhelming. Clara struggled to make sense of the overwhelming rush of information that flooded her mind. But with each passing day, she became more attuned to it. She began to understand how the Dark Clan would move, how they would try to manipulate and control the situation. The mental training was grueling, but it was effective. Clara found herself able to anticipate what the Vampire King would say before he said it, to predict the movements of her training partners before they made them. It felt like her mind was expanding, her perception growing sharper with each lesson. She no longer felt like a stranger to the power inside her. She was becoming one with it. But even as her training progressed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There were moments when she felt as though she were being watched, as though the shadows themselves were creeping closer. It was as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in on her, suffocating her with the weight of the coming battle. One night, as she sat alone in her room, Clara felt the unmistakable sensation of someone, or something, lurking just outside her door. Her heart raced, and she stood up quickly, her instincts alert. She crept toward the door, listening for any sign of movement. Then, without warning, the door swung open, and the Vampire King stepped inside. His expression was grave, his eyes filled with a kind of foreboding that sent a chill down her spine. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "the Dark Clan is here. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the Vampire King's words echoed in her mind. The Dark Clan was here. She had prepared for this moment for what felt like an eternity, but now that it was finally upon her, the weight of the situation hit her with full force. The training, the long days of hard work and discipline, had all led to this. She was ready, or at least, she hoped she was. The Vampire King's face was as unreadable as ever, but there was a tension in his eyes, a hint of the gravity of the situation. "We cannot hesitate," he said, his voice steady, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. "The Dark Clan has found us, and they will not stop until they have what they want. You must be ready, Clara." Clara nodded, her hands trembling slightly, but her mind was clear. She had faced her fears. She had faced the power within her. Now, it was time to face the real enemy. The Vampire King led her through the mansion, his stride long and purposeful, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Clara followed closely, her heart racing, her every sense on high alert. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the ancient mansion pressing in on her. It felt as though every stone, every shadow, was holding its breath in anticipation. When they reached the central chamber, the room was already filled with the Vampire King's most trusted allies. They stood in a circle, their faces grim but determined. Clara recognized some of them, warriors she had trained with, but there were others she didn't know, their presence silent but powerful. The Vampire King stepped into the center of the room, and the others followed suit, forming a tight circle around Clara. "This is it," the Vampire King said, his voice ringing out across the room. "The Dark Clan is here, and they will stop at nothing to take what we have. Our only choice is to fight. We will fight together, and we will win." Clara stood at the center of the circle, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The power within her surged, restless and ready. She could feel it, a pulsing energy that was no longer foreign to her. It was a part of her now. "We will fight with everything we have," the Vampire King continued. "But you, Clara, must be the key. They will come for you first. Your power is what they want, and we cannot allow that to happen." Clara felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood tall. The stakes had never been clearer. "I won't let them take it," she said, her voice steady. The Vampire King's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment, there was something like pride in his gaze. "I know you won't," he said quietly. "But remember, they are not just after you. They want everything, and they will use every trick, every weapon at their disposal." Had trained for this moment, but there was no way to truly prepare for the unknown. The doors to the chamber suddenly burst open, and a cold wind swept through the room. Clara's senses flared, and she immediately felt the presence of the Dark Clan. It was like a shadow moving across the room, dark and foreboding. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, tall, cloaked figures with eyes that glowed an unnatural red. Clara's breath caught in her throat. These were the Dark Clan. They moved with an eerie grace, their presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. At the head of the group stood a figure cloaked in deep black, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. His voice, when he spoke, was like the hiss of a serpent. "You cannot hide, Vampire King," the figure said, his voice dripping with malice. "Your time is up. The power that flows through your bloodline belongs to us." Clara's heart raced. She knew this was it, the moment they had all been preparing for. The Vampire King stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You will not take what is ours," he said, his voice calm but filled with an underlying fury. The Dark Clan leader let out a soft laugh, a sound that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "We already have what we want," the leader said, his eyes locking onto Clara. "The girl, she is the key. Hand her over, and we will spare the rest of you." Clara felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force. She could feel the darkness surrounding him, trying to worm its way into her mind, to take control. But Clara refused to let it. She had faced her fears, and now, she would face them again. The Vampire King stepped forward, his form growing taller, more imposing. "You will not have her," he said, his voice low and deadly. "She is not yours to claim." The Dark Clan leader snarled, his eyes flashing red. "Then we will take her by force," he spat. Without another word, the Dark Clan surged forward, their movements swift and coordinated. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she called upon the power within her. She could feel it surge through her veins, ready to be unleashed. She raised her hands, and the energy erupted from her, forming a shield of bright, radiant light. The force of the Dark Clan's attack collided with it, and Clara felt the impact reverberate through her body. But she held her ground. The shield held. She had faced her fear. She had faced the power within her. And now, she was ready to fight. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. Vampire stories have always captivated readers with their dark, mysterious worlds, and this one is no exception. Clara's journey into a supernatural realm is filled with intense training, emotional growth, and an epic battle against the Dark Clan. As she learns to harness a power she never knew she had, Clara becomes a key figure in the fight against an ancient enemy that will stop at nothing to claim what they desire. As the tension builds, the stakes get higher, and Clara must face her deepest fears to survive. The battle that unfolds will test her abilities, but she finds strength in the guidance of the Vampire King and the power that resides within her. In this thrilling tale of vampire stories, Clara's courage and determination shine through as she fights to protect herself and those she loves. As the Dark Clan closes in, Clara must use every lesson learned and every ounce of strength to stop them, or risk losing everything. These vampire stories are not just about blood and battles, but about self-discovery, sacrifice, and the power of embracing one's true nature. As the final confrontation nears, Clara will need to summon all her newfound strength to face the enemies that threaten her world, making this tale one of the most gripping vampire stories you'll ever read.